In the previous lecture, we discussed the fall of the First Crusader kingdom in the famous Battle of the Horns of Chittim in the year 1187, July 4th. That was the end of it. But, as it happened, the fall of the First Crusader kingdom caused shock in Europe. A third crusade began to organize in Europe, and it leaves Europe in 1190. It was led by some of the greatest kings of the era: Richard the Lionheart from England, Philip of France, and Friedrich Barbarossa of Germany. 3 kings went on a crusade, only 2 arrived. Why? Friedrich died along the way. He drowned in a river along the way to Jerusalem, and most of his army, most of his troops turned back and went back home. However, a couple of hundreds of knights came with the other kings to Jerusalem, to the Holy Land, and later they were part of the corps that established the Teutonic Knight Order. Meanwhile, Richard and Philip came to the Holy Land, and they began a series of battles, a series of wars against Saladin. By the year 1191, they managed to occupy major parts of the coastal plain, and especially the city of Acre, which was, as you recall, the main link between the Crusaders and Europe. It's a naval city. It had a port, it has commerce, it is a strong, wealthy city, and now it was in the hands of the Crusaders. They also defeated Saladin in other battles, but eventually, by 1192, Richard the Lionheart, Philip by then went back to France, and Saladin decided they had enough. Each of them had to go back home to maintain his rule. It was too dangerous in the medieval times to spend too long outside your country. Someone could use the opportunity to rebel against you. So Richard and Saladin decided to sign a peace treaty. It was signed in Jaffa, hence it is the Treaty of Jaffa. In this treaty, the Christians were granted free entry to the holy city of Jerusalem, which will be controlled by the Muslims. So it was considered to be an achievement on Richard's behalf. However, Richard failed twice in his attempts to actually conquer Jerusalem. And he went home, indeed, managing to establish a new small Crusader kingdom, but bearing in mind that he couldn't take Jerusalem. So the results of the Third Crusade were quite complex. You see, each side basically got to keep its territories, the territories that he held at the time of signing the treaty. Meaning the Crusaders held the coastal plain, and the rest of the country, which was the majority, was held by the Muslims, including Jerusalem. The Crusaders' new state, new kingdom, was basically a narrow strip of land in the coastal plain. It had no natural borders, except for the west, of course, which is the Mediterranean Sea. And from a geopolitical point of view, it is obvious to us as modern historians that this situation could not hold for long. The Crusaders would be in danger every day and every night. They can't allow themselves to have such a narrow, limited state. They will eventually have to break the borders and expand their kingdom. The other important thing I'd like to note in this respect is the fact that from this point, suddenly, in the land of Israel, we have 2 parallel histories. Now, this is something people usually don't notice. In the history of the Holy Land, the situation is always that we have a certain empire or kingdom or entity that controls the entire country. When the Byzantines were here, they controlled the entire country. When the Muslims were here, they controlled the entire country. When the Crusaders were here, in the First Crusader kingdom, they controlled the entire country. But now the country is basically divided between Christians, Crusaders, and Muslims. And these Muslims are the heirs of Saladin. They're called the Ayyubids because he is Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, Saladin the Ayyubid. So they are the Muslim Ayyubids, the Crusaders on the other side. So it means that in one part of the country, it is still the Crusader period. In the other part of the country, the majority of the country, it is now a new era, which is known as the Ayyubid period. It will merge eventually, but it will take some time. Meanwhile, in 1193, Salah ad-Din dies. And his legacy, the united monarchy that he created, bringing together Muslims from different places, crumbles and is divided into pieces. His heirs divide the country between themselves. But luckily for the Muslims at the time, these broken pieces of the empire of Saladin are reunited by his brother al-Malik al-Adil in the year 1200. So basically, by 1200, what we see here in the Holy Land is a very strong Ayyubid entity and a very feeble and weak Crusader entity. It seems like the Crusaders are doomed unless something or someone will come to save them. Al-Adil, the brother of Saladin, finds it very difficult to control the massive empire that he inherited. He is in control of Syria, many parts of the land of Israel, and also Egypt and parts of the northern areas of the Arabian Peninsula, the Hijaz area. To facilitate the control of these regions, he decides to nominate his two sons to practice a little. One of them will control Syria and the land of Israel, the other one will control Egypt. The one in control of Syria is known as al-Malik al-Mu'adhim Isa, and we'll get back to him shortly. The other one, al-Malik al-Kamil, receives Egypt. And at the top, the big boss is Daddy, al-Malik al-Adil. In 1204, a fourth crusade is on its way to the Holy Land. But that crusade was a total failure because they diverted to Constantinople. They got involved in the local politics of the Byzantine Empire. They never came to the Holy Land. But for the Ayyubids in the Holy Land, that was a bad omen. They believed that if there was a fourth crusade, it failed, a fifth will be on its way shortly. So in 1212, the father of the Ayyubid brothers, remember his name is Al-Adil, orders his son, al-Malik al-Mu'adhim Isa, who's responsible for Syria and the land of Israel, to fortify the land, fortify Jerusalem, prepare it for a siege by building walls and fortresses. And indeed, a couple of years later, in 1217, a fifth crusade is on its way from Europe. It is led by the Crusader king Jean de Brienne and a legate, someone sent by the Pope to lead the army. They have a new concept. Instead of going to the Holy Land directly, they decide that the key to the Holy Land is actually Egypt. If you gain control over Egypt, the Holy Land will fall into your hands shortly, they believe. So they go and attack Egypt and not directly the Holy Land. Meanwhile, al-Malik al-Adil, the father of the two brothers, dies. And the two brothers are now, one controlling Syria and the land of Israel, the other one controlling Egypt. And the truth is that they are the worst enemies. They hate each other more than they hate the Crusaders. And that plays very well into the hands of the Crusaders. The Crusaders attack Egypt. That's the Fifth Crusade, remember. And Al-Malik al-Kamil, who feels that he cannot stand the Crusader attack, suggests to the Crusaders, why don't you just leave me alone? You don't really need Egypt, and I'll help you fight against my brother, and you'll get Jerusalem and the land of Israel. The greatest deal you can expect. But the Crusaders decide this is a bad idea. They do not accept that offer. They believe that if he is so desperate so as to offer that to them, maybe a little more pressure and he will be totally broken and they will gain Egypt and the Holy Land. But as you will see, that was a great mistake on behalf of the Crusaders. Meanwhile, what happened in the land of Israel, in the Holy Land? Well, the king of the Holy Land and Syria, remember, that's Al-Malik al-Mu'adhim Isa, the brother, the hated brother of the king of Egypt, or the Sultan of Egypt. And he decides that if his brother will collaborate with the Crusaders, it will be very difficult to defend the Holy Land. So what can he do? Perhaps you'd suggest that it would be better to reinforce the fortifications of the Holy Land and the fortifications of Jerusalem, just in case there will be an invasion. But Al-Malik al-Mu'adhim Isa had a brilliant idea. Instead of reinforcing the fortification of the Holy Land, he decides to systematically demolish everything, especially the walls of Jerusalem. And he does that from 1219 on. It's quite amazing because this is the last thing you'd think a sultan should do if he is threatened by a Crusader invasion. But his reasoning was truly brilliant. He thought that if the Crusaders invade the Holy Land and they defeat him in the open space, in the open field, they will enter the cities and they will be fortified inside. He will never be able to get them out. But if he's going to be defeated and the Crusaders won't have fortifications to hide behind, next season, next summer, he will defeat them in the open battlefield. So that was his idea. But as it happened, things turned out quite differently than anyone expected. Remember the Crusaders? They got the best offer from the Egyptians and they said, no, 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 we don't want your cooperation. We'll conquer you and the Holy Land. That was a big mistake. I said that already. And indeed, the Crusaders miscalculated the power of the Egyptians. The Egyptians were strong enough to hold on against the Crusaders, and the Crusaders failed to take over Egypt. So the Crusaders of the Fifth Crusade never got to lay their hands on the fortifications of Jerusalem. They never got here. It means that the destruction of the walls by Al-Malik al-Mu'adhim Isa as a preparation for the invasion was actually in vain. There was no need in doing that, but as it was done, for us, modern scholars, this is a great treasure, because when he destroyed the walls, for instance, in Banyas, in Tzfat, and in Jerusalem, the fallen stones of his destruction were identified by modern scholars in modern excavations. We can actually tell you which wall was built and destroyed by Al-Malik al-Mu'adhim Isa, which is quite exciting to see a historical tale which is reflected in the archaeological finds.